Hey everybody, I am back with a new movie review. For this month, I'll be covering some Street Fighter films. Kind of in like a celebration of the new Street Fighter movie that was announced and casted and all the other stuff that will probably be coming out next year at some point. Probably going to be in rival with the new Mortal Kombat film that was initially scheduled to come out this year in October, but was pushed to next year. Now, a couple of years ago, I had like an initial plan of covering a lot of like fighting game movie adaptations, like with a few Tekken stuff, and Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter all in 1 year. But things keep happening where just that just wasn't happening. However, I figured I'd take the time now where I got like at least a spare month to cover reviews, because I just recently wrapped up some James Bond films that I've been wanting to do for a while too. So the first Street Fighter film I'll be covering is Street Fighter 2, the animated film based off the Street Fighter 2 video game. And honestly, out of all the fighting games, Street Fighter is my personal favorite. I love the other fighting games too, but in terms of knowing like the backstory in like a decent detail, Street Fighter is pretty much at the top, then Mortal Kombat, and somewhat of Tekken information, but not as thoroughly, but is up there. But as far as fighting games, like I played a decent amount of other ones, like Guilty Gear here and there, but I don't know the lore like that of Guilty Gear. Dark, what was the one, not Darksiders, because that's, with the Horsemen. What was that, Darkstalkers. I played, a cousin of mine, when I was a little kid, had the Darkstalkers, one of the Darkstalkers games, and I, remember playing that. Of course, by extension, the Marvel vs. Capcom, they had some Darkstalkers characters in it. But like I said, I played that, but I don't have the super extensive knowledge of the history behind that world. And of course, like Killer Instinct, I know a fair bit about that, not super thoroughly. But Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken is probably like the top three ones that like I know the lore of. But Street Fighter, my personal favorite. But also, leave a comment below. Let me know what you guys' favorite fighting game of all time that you can just probably talk endlessly about in terms of the background. Oh, Virtua Fighter. I played one Virtua Fighter game that I had on I'm pretty sure it was the SNES or Sega Saturn. It's one of those old school games, because they bring Virtua Fighter back, and I remember playing the Blue Garb Ninja, but I just forgot the character's name altogether. I forgot the entire nature of Virtua Fighter. Oh, Soul Calibur. I like playing Soul Calibur, but I only know maybe a few characters. But I haven't gotten back to a Soul Calibur game in so long. I played one recently that over my friend's house, who had one of those like all those classic games into one packet in his one of his consoles, and we played some old school Soul Calibur. And of course, I just chose the one I remember distinctly, which is Ivy Valentine More so because of her iconic weapon, the sword whip, but also because her busty features. And of course, I remember the villain, which is like a possessed evil sword thing. I know a bit of the lore and everything like that. Beyond that, but in terms of Soul Calibur, I know very, very little. But yeah, I mentioned my top three that I really thoroughly spent my youthful investment in. But in any case, today I'll be talking about Street Fighter 2, the animated film. And of course, we got Skip Stelrack, credited as Hank Smith, versus Ryu. Eddie Farrison, credited as Ted Richards, versus Ken. Leah Sargent, credited as Mary Briscoe, versus Chun-Li. Sorry, 1 second. Kirk Thornton, credited as Donald Lee, versus Guile. Bryan Cranston, credited as Phil Williams, versus Fei Long. Yep, the very same Bryan Cranston. Bo Billingsley, credited as John Hammond. Yeah, seriously. Who voices DJ. Steve Bloom, credited as Richard Cardona, voices T-Hawk. And by the way, people say that there was no representation, real representation back in the day. This came out in the 90s, and T-Hawk, which my first introduction was T-Hawk, wasn't Street Fighter 4 technically, but he always been around. We just, people just never realized him all that much. But there was Native American representation with T-Hawk, which is like a cool design, cool character, and so dope to bring them into Street Fighter 4. Matter of fact, speaking of Native American representation, Killer Instinct has 2 Native American brothers on in their game. Both very cool. So talking like there's no representation like that. It's like, get off. Like, you could haven't been paying attention. You just very much, have like a Mandela effect or something. We had Deborah Rogers, credited as SJ Chavan, voiced Cammy. Richard Epcar, credited as Patrick Gilbert, who voices E. Honda. Michael Sorek, credited as Don Carey, voices Dawson. Kevin Seymour, credited as Tom Carlton, voices Blanca. Michael Shork, credited as William Johnson, voices Zangief. Milton James, credited as Mary Williams, voices the character Seno. Richard Cancino, credited as Steve Davis, voices Vega, Balrog in Japan, which, by the way, yeah, it's a whole thing in Japan back in the early days of Street Fighter, where Japan called M. Bison Vega and Balrog as Mike Bison, kind of like an homage to Mike Tyson. But around 1982, there was some grape allegations with Mike Tyson, so they had to change that up to, avoid that controversy. And that's kind of a bit of the origin story to that name switch up. Peter Spellos, credited as David Conrad, voices Sagat. Joe Ramirza, credited as Joe Michaels, voices Balrog. Wanda Nowicki, credited as Tony Burke, voices Eliza. Michael Force, credited as George Selick, credited as Ryu and Ken Sensei. Of course, I guess at that time didn't know it was Goken was their sensei. And by the way, it was one of my slight pet peeves of this film that they don't have like. I'm not sure it's because we didn't know at that time, but I'm pretty sure it was widely known that Goken was a character, but probably wasn't officially created until a little bit later after Street Fighter II game. So that's probably why we didn't actually get an official name or face. And Tom Weiner, credited as Phil Matthews, who voices M. Bison. So the movie opens with Shadow Law, the syndicate organization run by M. Bison, whose mission is to kidnap and brainwash the best fighters around the world to be his like top assassins to pretty much set up a global takeover. And he has these little robot humanoid drones pretty much spying from afar these fighters in their movesets for study. And is in his early days of Ryu's, like right after he's finished his training with Goken and started his worldly travels trying to hone his skills with the best fighters, he come across Sagat, and this is the infamous moment when Ryu kind of tapped into the dark side of the crap. I'm blanking on it. Hado. Jeez. Oh, not Hado. Crap. What is this? Like, oh, this is gonna bother me. I don't get like the fighting style correct. Asasuken fighting style. The dark side of the Asasuken, and he ends up doing a Shoryuken, which caused a massive, cut, on Sagat's chest, severely wounding him, and causes kind of like a ripple effect where, because Sagat was this big time king of Muay Thai, and this kind of shattered a bit of his worldview and like his kind of like image of himself. I guess a bit of his ego was bruised, which puts him in kind of like a downward spiral, effectively losing his way. He ends up falling into working with Shadow Law, being one of M. Bison's personal bodyguards, right along with Balrog, who was a known cheer, former boxing champ, who's a bit crazy. And I don't really care for how he's depicted in this. I love the animation in this, very old school 90s. But they really drew this guy looking so crazy with his eyes just like kind of like pointing in different directions, kind of just crazy. He's known as a crazy buffalo, but dear goodness, it's like this dude is like looks so like they like F it with this guy. We also got Vega, who is this matador fighting style, but he is so vain. He has his mask to protect his beautiful face. He also got a giant kind of claw grip hand grip thing where he used to like cut up people. Pretty much like all three of these guys are very lethal in their own right. Eventually in the future, around Street Fighter 4, the guy kind of like kind of broke away from Shadow Lu or Shadow Law. I grew up with Shadow Lu, but he ends up kind of like trying to find himself and getting his remaster Ryu, and then kind of like made peace and got back on the right path. It was a long journey. I just got to give you a little 401 about that. But anyway, after monitoring the fight, Bison became very interested in getting Ryu making him into his top assassin, given his fighting capabilities. But he having a tough time trying to track Ryu down because he's always on the move and he's always suppressing his ki because after the event with Sagat, Ryu come to understanding that the dark side of the Asasuken, also known as the Assassin's Fist, he is trying to temper that or try to master it because he didn't want to lose himself to it. So that's why it was hard time trying to find this guy. But in the meantime, we are met with Chun-Li and Interpol meeting up with Guile and the American military, trying to work together into stopping Bison's criminal organization. Guile having a personal vendetta against Bison because Bison was responsible in killing his best friend Charlie Nash, who was the one responsible of teaching Guile all those fighting techniques that he knows, that we're familiar with. But like the Guile's like that leap moves he does. Well, I'm picking on these fighting moves that I know like for ages. Like I'm getting like put on blast right now, so I'm like my brain's kind of like crap. What is a freaking fighting style? What's wrong with me? Doggone it. Like showing up, like, oh, why is it not showing up on Wikipedia? For goodness sake. Sorry. Okay, yeah. The Flash get Sonic Boom. Oh my god, what's wrong with me? Well, I don't know as to why, but I guess it's kind of akin to where like Dan compared to Ryu and Ken, where Guile knows how to use these moves effectively, but not as well as Charlie was, because Guile used the Sonic Boom. He used two arms to create some kind of like vacuum type of like wind slash kind of thing. But he used both of his arms to do so, to pull that off. While Charlie was, I guess, the originator of it, can use only one arm to create that powerful move that it takes Guile two arms to do. It's kind of similar to how, it's kind of similar to how Dan, his ultimate move is kind of like just the normal Hadouken that Ryu and Ken automatically knows how to do. It is like, I guess, complicated to a certain degree where he had to do something else to compensate in order to pull it off. Sorry, I kind of meandered a bit, but I just had to like make sure I get the answer because otherwise it's gonna bother me. 1 second here. Anyway, uh, so uh, Chili, it's kind of like almost like a buddy cop thing. But one of my issues that we don't spend enough time between these two to feel like the friendship that they cultivate. Uh, Now it's kind of like a balancing act because Street Fighter is kind of an ensemble franchise with multiple characters with interesting backstories, which steadily grows as the series went on. Because around Street Fighter 4, we are introduced to characters like Yuri or Jury to some people, which is becoming one of my personal favorite. Right up there in terms of favorite Street Fighter characters. She is an instant favorite. Most of those people who, are got foot fetish people out there in the world. But mostly because I got a thing for bad girls, especially if they got a little bit of crazy in them. But we also got characters like El Fuerte, which is kind of a shame. We don't see El Fuerte anymore since Street Fighter 4, because I guess not many people care for it. But I thought he was very interesting. They could just kind of built him up a little bit, gave him more of an interesting story or something. But he was kind of there was something there, and they could have built off of. It wasn't terrible of a character. And then of course, like, I'm glad they brought in T-Hawk, of course. But then you got characters like what's his name? This the fat guy who's obsessed with trying to find Ken and fight him, and keep confusing every blonde guy he come across as Ken. And of course, well, I was about to say Sakura, but no, Sakura has always been around starting in like Street Fighter 2. But yeah, Street Fighter 4 is up there in terms of my favorite Street Fighter game because there's so many characters they put into this thing. I argue probably record breaking until like Street Fighter 5 rolled around. But it's a balancing act because they made sure that they based off the Street Fighter 2, so we got like a decent amount of characters to focus on, but only probably half of them get in more of a spotlight. So I think they balanced it well, but it's just like, man, they could have, because they took the time out to stop, and because we get to see DJ, but he doesn't really do much because Chili and Guile spend in the first act a bit of their time going to people like DJ, or at least trying to spread the word to people like DJ, who's pretty much like their the guy on the street kind of situation, and telling him to like, okay, we need you to spread the word that Shadowlaw, will have some kind of like goons, robot goons, monitoring you guys, and probably like keep away or destroy those things or whatever. Don't get involved because they're trying to either kill you or recruit you. So don't get caught with your pants down kind of situation. And it's cool to see DJ, but it's just like he doesn't get involved. He's just a glorified cameo. But we get to see like Fei Long, which is pretty much like a inspiration, taking Bruce Lee as the inspiration of the design of this character. And we get to see Ryu traveling, find characters like him, which we see all these other characters, like we see Dawson. E Honda powers around just a little bit halfway through the film, and we get to see him fight. Well, we don't really get to see him fight with Balrog. We see a tussle, and they fight off screen, and he wins, obviously. It's cool to see these signature fighting moves, and they're animated pretty well. There's like a weird cameo, at least what it seems like a cameo, because of Akuma, who's sitting outside this little area entrance leading towards where Dawson is fighting E Honda. There's no, I don't know, it's some kind of inside joke or something the animators is playing around with. But it's like, why are you designing a guy who looks exactly like Akuma? And it's like, it's not even like he look like a beggar on the street, but he's dressed like Akuma. It's weird. I thought it was like, something they're going to be doing with him. But no, it was kind of like either a weird coincidence or something animators was doing to mess around. Anyway, Ken, we see he got a girlfriend, Eliza, who he wants to marry, but he has this thing where he's been away from Ryu for a while since they left the dojo after years of training, and now they go out into the world to try to hone their skills. Ken, little comes from a very affluent family. He is, pretty much like an owner of a bunch of hotels or something like that. But he doesn't carry himself like some kind of big wig, rich not entrepreneur, but a rich businessman. He prefers to be on the street, honing skills, fighting, and he's kind of like an everyday dude, kind of like a polar opposite of somebody like Kaiba from Yu-Gi-Oh. But he, it's kind of like he wants to. He's been away from Ryu for so long. He wants to see what he learns and hone his skills. He likes sparring with his best friend, but he wants to do that before he takes that next leap with Eliza. But he gets spotted by one of Bison's little robot goons, spying on him fighting T-Hawk. And since Bison's been struggling to find Ryu, seeing that Ken utilized the same moveset as Ryu, figures like, oh, I'll get the next best thing. And if we come across Ryu, all the better, because we can just send Ken to go fight him and claim 2 for the price of 1. Eventually, Chun-Li and Guile figure out that Bison is on a search for a fighter named Ryu. Bison's taking a special interest in. So they're making a mission to try to not only find Ryu, but warn other noble fighters. But Shadowlaw, being sick of Chun-Li's crap, Bison, who was responsible for killing her father, who's also part of Interpol, at least from my recollection, sends out Vega to assassinate Chun-Li. She's literally in her apartment, and I'm surprised the level of TNA in this film, because this is when the, people hold Street Fighter 2 animated film in high regards to this day. Because I can see why, because I remember watching this as a kid, probably one time, but probably didn't stick with me like that. But watching this again, it's like, wow, the animation, for the most part, I give it like a good, 80 percentile, very high. But I'm shocked. It's not gory, but they allow, like, cuts and blood and bruises and all this other stuff. But we also get, some Chun-Li TNA, which I did not expect to see in this, but not complaining. But as she's about to get ready for bed, Vega somehow sneaks in while Gao, rushes back to her apartment, and she ends up fighting off Vega. Hey Katie, thanks for the follow. So, we're gonna see the iconic spinning bird kick and the lightning kicks, classic Chun-Li moves. Chun-Li, one of the best female characters in pop culture history. But Chun-Li manages to kick Vega outside of her apartment, falling apparently to his death. Not really. He does eventually comes back. But she's so battered and bruised from the fight, Gao eventually shows up and takes her to the hospital where she, got to go through some surgery. But he gets word that about Bison looking for Ken. So he goes try to find Ken, but unfortunately Bison finds him first. Defeats him in a fight thanks to his Shadow Lu powers. He pretty much, to explain his abilities, breaking it down like this, he essentially weaponized his soul. He kind of learned from these gypsy women in his youth about soul power, but in order to increase his power, he ended up purging the goodness from his soul, so only what was left is pure evil. So and that's why he can be able to do the things that he does. Just to break it down to that little easy to digest information. The goodness part of his soul kind of I'm not sure if he just formed his own body or possessed someone, but there's a Street Fighter character named Rose who possesses similar feats as Bison, but that's where the goodness part of his soul went to, Rose, who's like a fortune teller kind of woman, who was the first time I actually was first introduced to the character of Rose was in Street Fighter 4. She was in previous Street Fighter games, but I think, at least aside from hardcore Street Fighter fans, most people probably their first introduction to Rose would be Street Fighter 4. Anyway, Guile eventually figures out where Ryu is. He's training on top of a mountain in, was it Tibet? Um, I kind of wish that Fei Long and Dhalsim tagged along, but what was it? Uh, yeah, it was Thailand. Not too bad. I knew it was like a T in there. So they go to Thailand on top of this mountain where Ryu is training, and Ihana's like piling around with him. Gao confronts Ryu, introducing himself, and let him know what happened to Ken. That's where Bison shows up with a possessed Ken, or brainwashed Ken, which I was kind of expecting to be violent Ken, because there's a thing called evil Ryu because of the dark Asasuken taking over, and when that happens, he goes into the evil Ryu mode. However, something like that happened to. This is kind of like a what if kind of thing. I'm not sure if it's ever been canonized. No pun intended, canonized. But there's like a thing called violent Ken, where it's kind of like something similar to happen to Ken, like it did to Ryu. I was kind of thinking like, oh, it's like a not so subtle reference to violent Ken. But Ken and Ryu fight, but Ryu is mostly defending himself because he's trying to reach the real Ken, while Gao is, trying to fight Bison, but he is ill-equipped to deal with somebody like Bison, while Ihana is tussling with Balrog. But the long drawn-out fight with Ken and Ryu can eventually overcome the brainwashing after Gao loses the fight to Bison. Bison bitch slaps Ken and fights Ryu, tries to take him by force. 1 second, everybody. Alright, but Ryu usually he probably would feel like a better fight than this, but he get his butt whipped by Ken for the most part. He struggles to really take on someone like Bison, who's pretty much fighting fresh. Ken, overcoming the brainwashing, teams up with Ryu to fight off Bison, and they both do a massive Hadouken, into Bison, who crashes into his plane and explodes, seemingly killing him. E Honda, who beat Balrog off screen and rescues a beaten up Guile. While this is all happening, the Interpol and American military find Shadaloo base, arrest a bunch of people and taking it down, and of course Chun-Li recovers from her surgery, and Guile reveals the good news. While Ken wishes his friend Ryu goodbye, Ryu takes his continues on his journey, traveling around the world to fight the best fighters, hone his skills. You come across Bison again in his truck, who's seemingly not dead, and the movie ends with them just like about to clash. So that was Street Fighter 2, the animated film. it's a great film. You know, I have a few quibbles about it. You know, like kind of wish if you bring in these recognizable characters, I kind of wish they were brought in to help with dealing with someone like Bison or any of his notable goons. Don't know what happened to Sagat. Because long after the whole scar that was put on him by Ryu, we see him with Bison, but he never showed up with Balrog and Bison to capture Ryu at all. So don't know what happened to him. He kind of disappeared after a certain point. Yeah. Like I said, it was like a weird balancing act. Some things are going to probably be left on the table or forgotten about. But they handled it pretty well, you know, all things considered. But let me know in the comments below what you guys think of Street Fighter 2, the animated film. In a few minutes, I'll be covering Street Fighter Alpha movie. But like this video, share this with your friends, and I will see you guys in a little bit. Peace.